Fine. Thanks for coming and welcome to Give It a Go.
Dynamo Davey, they called him, Mr. Radio, the man with the golden voice. He was probably the most popular radio personality Australia has ever seen. In the days when radio was king, his programs were listened to by millions. In this next hour, we're going to look at the fabulously successful career and lifestyle of Jack Davey and talk to some of the people who knew and worked with him. Percy Campbell, for instance, who met Jack soon after he arrived from New Zealand as a rather impoverished immigrant in 1931.
When he arrived in this country, apparently things weren't so easy in New Zealand either. When he arrived in this country, his father, who was Captain Davey of the Arboteer, and he set Jack on the grounds of Australia, and Jack had 28 shillings in his pocket. Now, that's how Jack's financial position stood when he arrived here. Anyhow, he made up his mind he was going to approach the radio stations, and he came along to 2GB and spoke to the then general manager of the day, who was A.E. Bennett, who was the first general manager of 2GB, and he was auditioned. I was then in the program department in the library, and he was auditioned, and A.E. Bennett said, well, we'll give you a run as a broadcast personality in a casual way to start off with. And then he began to be around 2GB during the daytime doing little odd spots. And in between time he was chasing other areas. At the same time he also took on a 2 or 3 engagements for the ABC as a crooner. Because he was
a singer as well.
Yes, he was a singer, yes. He was, well, he classified himself as a crooner, and that's a nice classification.
Yes.
Wishing will make it so. Just keep on wishing, and care will go. Dreamers tell us dreams come true. It's no mistake. And wishes are the dreams we dream when we're away.
Jack obviously fancied himself as a crooner in those early days. Here's Abe Romaine, who led the band at a fashionable Sydney night spot called the Ginger Jar.
That was where a fattish sort of a chap used to come down of a night, not every night, of course, and he was the breakfast announcer on 2GB. And, of course, breakfast announcers these days might go to sleep a bit earlier, but this fellow seemed to be out at all hours of the night, and he'd come down there perhaps about 10 o'clock, and I'd catch his eye at the side of the stage with his finger pointed to his lips saying, without hearing it, "Can I sing?" And I used to say, "Oh, all right, come on," and, of course, that was Jack Davey. He used to sing all those early Crosby numbers, pardon me, May I, Love Thy Neighbour, and various other ones. I know he made a couple of records which were on Columbia. I think a friend of mine called Noel Judd organised it, and I think one was called Cosmopolitan Blues.
I've got a new song, another blues song, but it's not because I'm feeling blue. Goodbye, depression, I've got possession of a happiness entirely new. But the reason for this happiness, I'll leave to you to guess. Young men gay and sporty, fat men over 40, we love the cosmopolitan blue. Men 6 feet and taller, men 4 feet and smaller, don't you wish that you were in our shoes? Thin men, fat men, giant men and flat men, normal men and crooners on the air. We're admired and our happiness inspired by that something so completely new and rare. You've heard our acclamation about this new creation, these blues that you will never want to lose. And with the coming season, you'll soon find out the reason. What are these cosmopolitan blues?
Jack became quite a success as a breakfast show personality, and perhaps rather wisely gave up crooning for disc jockeying. It was during this period that he established his lifelong call sign, Hi-ho, everybody. Percy Campbell again.
And it was that stage that Jack and I became pretty close together because I was in the panel operator, as well as being the librarian, selecting the music and selecting the breakfast session music and selecting the other music that other programs that Jack Davey did. And so our time of association just grew and grew over the years. And subsequently, in about 1934-35, Jack got this brilliant idea of quiz shows. And he came into me one day and he said, Percy, he said, would you work on a little type of quiz program, a general knowledge quiz program? I said, certainly, Jack. And he and I selected the question material together. It was a half-hour program. By that time, he had talked to A. Bennett and said he would like to have a go at it. I said, I'd like to have a go at that. So we did subsequently, and A. Bennett said, all right, we'll put it to air on a Saturday night.
What was it called, Bert?
What do you think? And it was a general knowledge quiz, and the top prize for this, there were about between 20 and 30 questions, audience participation, ranging from 2 and 6 to 5 shillings. That was a big prize money.
He's right. From What Do You Think, Jack progressed to writing and producing a radio detective serial, The Adventures of Bobby Britton, with young Dick Fair playing the detective's assistant. Next came Two Jacks and a Piano, a musical show he did with the talented composer-entertainer Jack Lumsden. By the late 1930s, the large advertisers were beginning to dominate the commercial airwaves. Colgate-Palmolive's agency, George Patterson's, set up a special unit to produce programs such as the Youth Parade. Jack was chosen as the compere, and many young artists who went on to better things appeared on that program. Joy Nichols, Michael Pate, and Margot Lee, to mention but 3. During the early years of the war, Jack hosted a variety program called Star Parade. Demand for seats was so great that a venue larger than the Radio Auditorium in Sydney had to be found. Abe Romaine.
I was at the Trocadero all through the war, and someone got the very bright idea that instead of the comparatively small crowd at the Trocadero on a Tuesday night, they sold the place, or rented it if you like, to Colgate-Palmolive to do their show, the Davey Show and the Youth Show, using the Trocadero Orchestra, that's the one I had, and we had it bolstered up with strings and all that sort of thing. And they had a seating arrangement, and they used to seat 1,200 people.
Wow.
And we did, I can remember the figure, we did 37 shows. That's 37 Tuesday nights from the Trocadero of the Jack Davey Show. The compere was Ron Randall, who used to open the show and then introduce Jack.
Another wartime program, Rise and Shine, which later became Leave Pass, was aimed at the armed forces. Young Harry Griffith's very first job was as assistant producer on the show. One of his tasks was to write the quiz questions, but Jack didn't always stick to the script. Here's Harry.
It was the usual start. We used to have a fanfare and a protect show. Leave pass, and there he is, Jack Davey, applause, and on Jack would come. And those days, we used to record directly onto those big 16-inch discs. And the first American soldier comes up and he says, step up to the microphone, soldier, and tell me your name and rank. And the soldier says, Private Rubbing, sir. He said, Private Rubbing, that's not a name, that's a habit. And well, a great laugh. Then he turned around. Well, censorship was very strict in those days, and you just couldn't say that.
No.
So he had to say to the boys in the control room, I'm terribly sorry. You'll have to set up all the recording again. But he said, fellas, you've got to understand, the gag was so good, I just couldn't let it pass. So, when we go back to record, we put the new disc on and set it all up. 7 seconds from now, boom, boom. He says, step up to the microphone, soldier, and tell me your name and rank. He said, Private Rubbing, sir. He said, no comment. And got just as big a laugh, because the audience knew what the answer was anyway.
Here's a rare recording of a Rise and Shine program with Al Thomas conducting a Truth and Consequence segment.
Your name, please.
Private Apple.
Private Apple. All right, Private Apple. I have only one eye and cannot see, but Mother likes to work with me. What am I? Louder, boys. We can't hear. It's a needle.
A needle.
Right. Gong. Give him a gong. Bang. Well, have you ever been wanting to be a band leader? Ever like to lead a band?
Nah.
Well, you're going to tonight.
Isn't he good?
I have here Murray Gilman's baton. Now, you're going to lead the orchestra. You got to, get 1, 2, and then away they go.
Okay.
There you are, senor. Off you go, maestro. Come on, 5 seconds. 1, 2.
During the war, Jack did a stint with the American Red Cross as an honorary entertainer, receiving the rank of captain. He also wrote and recorded a number of topical novelty songs.
There's no more room now in our air raid shelter. There's Aunt and Gran and Dad and Mom and me. And when the sirens sound, we all run helter-skelter. Just Aunt and Gran and Dad and Mom and me. Of course it isn't very big, and it isn't very long, and it isn't very deep, and it isn't very strong. So if a bomb drops, take a quick look up at heaven for Aunt and Gran and Dad and Mom and me.
In 1942, Star Parade was upgraded and renamed Calling the Stars. The program became the glamour show of the Colgate stable, attracting a team of top writers, including Freddie Parsons, Alexander MacDonald, Al Thomas, Rex Dorr, and Jack Davey himself. Jack's secretary at the time was Merle Jamison.
We had everybody who was anybody in the entertainment field in those days on that show. And anybody who wasn't asked was offended.
Give us some names.
Well, Strella Wilson was one of our main singers, and her daughter Pauline Garrick. And I don't know whether it's news or not, but Joan Sutherland also sang for us in those early days. Nobody knew then what was going to happen.
No.
Angela Parcells was another marvellous singer.
Lovely soprano.
Yes.
Very well known
Beautiful.
at that period. Yes.
And, of course, amongst the comedy lot, we had Dick Bentley and Moe, Willie Fennell. And we had also a lot of, we had a big orchestra, and we had Dennis Collinson ran the orchestra in Maine, but Brian Lawrence had a small band of his own with a musical show. And Montague Brealey came out from England, and he had a half-hour show, a musical show. Then, of course, when Jack went from the Colgate unit down to Melbourne, Ron Beck came over as director of productions, and he brought Jack Burgess over as an announcer, and also Terry Howard, who was a very popular singer in those days.
So it's a roll call of great artists?
Yes, it really was.
Why, they even had international stars.
Colgate Palmolive presents Calling the Stars. Colgate Palmolive present a special edition of Calling the Stars, bringing you those Australian artists you've constantly acclaimed as your #1 favorite, and the first lady in any land of entertainment. A lady that we've all loved in the past, but after knowing her tonight, a lady we'll love even more intensely in the future. The world's sweetheart, Gracie Fields. Across the broad arch of the world, under the gold of the sun and the gleam of the stars, within the great cities and the humble villages, and today in the bases and battlefronts of this greatest and most terrible of all wars, No voice is better known, nor more loved and eagerly awaited than our darling of the stage, Gracie Field. Well may it be said of her, in the words of Shakespeare, age cannot wither her, nor custom stale her infinite variety. And over this vast expanse of earth, in the most remote and strange places, among hundreds of millions of people of all races, creeds, and languages, you will find two other remarkable ambassadors of happiness, of health and beauty, in Colgate's dental cream and Palmolive soap. These world-famous products have done much for humanity, and like the enduring influence of Gracie Field, they are world-famous because they bring to you a quality and a performance that are beyond compare.
A hard introduction to follow. One artist to achieve fame through Calling the Stars was Willie Fennell. He was called in to replace another comedian, George Blackshaw, who died suddenly.
I was more or less pushed to go down and audition for this spot because they said, no, every comedian in Sydney is having a go. It's the biggest thing on the air. And I had just come out of the army, knew nothing about the show, and took quite a bit of persuading to go down and do a little sort of bit. I had only worked in amateur shows, never done a professional performance in my life. But to cut a long story short, I got the job for one 5-minute spot. And that was in the Jack Davey, that was then Master of Ceremonies, together with Jack Burgess and a big lineup of people. So I did a little character which they call Fooey Fennell, did a little send-up on English BBC race commentators as compared with Australian race commentators. And the general manager then liked the spot, Jack liked the spot, and he said, could you write something for next week? Similar. I said, well, I've got quite a few bits like this. But I can remember Jack saying, there's only one thing wrong, Will, you don't wait for laughs. You were getting great laughs there, and you're just riding right into them. You've got the time for laughs.
Look, Tommy, what's your usual occupation?
I'm a domino spotter. I work 24 hours a day spotting dominoes in a domino factory.
24 hours a day? Oh, what are you doing off tonight?
Tonight we're making double blanks.
What funny stories do you know?
Funny story by me. This is so funny I'm likely to laugh. If a bull... Now listen, if a bull swallowed... If a bull swallowed a mill's bomb, what would that be? Don't you know? I'll tell you. If a bull swallowed a mill's bomb, that would be atrocious. No, deplorable. No, abominable.
Oh, no. Oh, if you could only cook.
Yeah, I can do that, too. I made chicken soup this morning.
Oh, well, was that easy?
Well, I did have a bit of trouble getting the chicken to sit down in hot water.
Roy Reen, Mo, entered the Colgate-Palmolive radio unit in 1946, and there soon developed a strong rivalry between him and Jack Davey. This reached something of a peak when a Friday night half-hour situation comedy program, Colgate's Cavalcade, was introduced. Hal Lashwood.
One week we would be running the fire brigades, following week the ferries, and following week something else. And it was Jack and Roy and myself. I used to do a character, I used to call him Chiefy Pie. Say, oh, don't be silly, Chiefy Pie. One of those funny little characters, and I used to do that. And we were the three. He was our boss. Mo had to call him Chief. It was typical of Jack that he had to be called Chief.
Yes.
Even that in itself.
Yeah.
And but Roy used to work on one side of him, on the right side of him. I used to work on the left side of him. And of course, Mo was the greatest comedian, and he used to do some things, just behind Jack, just behind him, with poor funny faces, and Jack being unaware of it, and the laughs would come in the wrong place.
And about time, too. It's Mortar Mixer Mo. We've been waiting for you. Where have you been?
I've been fixing up the foreman. He fell into the wet cement, and now he's as stiff as a board.
Well, where is he?
He's outside in the hall.
I didn't notice him.
You should have. When you came in, you hung your hat on him.
Well, I'm glad you've been doing something. Have you got the sand?
No, but my quack tells me I got the dandruff.
Listen, Mo, look, didn't I tell you to get a cart and go to Bondi for some sand?
Yes, Chief.
I sincerely hope that you had a good look around at Bondi and noticed some of the new structures down there.
Notice them? I could hardly take my eyes off them.
I know. Some of them are architectural miracles.
Yes, they're little beauties, all right.
I'm so glad that you're taking so much interest in your work. This'll mean promotion for you.
Promotion?
My word.
Right, I saw a lovely job there.
Well, I'm always wanting new ideas and designs. Tell me, did you go all over this? Was it all in good order?
Superb.
Ah, yes. There's nothing more pleasing to the eye than a well-built block of flats.
Blimey, I thought you meant those big sunburned Sheilas of the French bathing suits.
You call yourself a builder. What do you know about the building trade?
How unkind you can be. Why, for years I've been working with my Uncle Gerald.
Your Uncle Gerald?
Yes, we built all the flats up in the King's Cross area.
Your Uncle Gerald and yourself? I don't believe it.
Well, half the places up there are Jerry built. All our family are builders.
Are they?
Yes, there's Kit. She carries the grit. And Grandma, she brings the hammer. And Jules, he brings the tools. And Rod, he brings the hod. And Dick...
I know. He lays the brick.
No, he brings the pick.
Well, who lays the brick?
Mick.
I thought Mick was sick.
No, that's Nick.
He had a very, very keen wish to be a comedian, and I didn't ever think he was a funny man. He loved telling stories. I mean, he'd meet you in the street or he'd have a cup of coffee. He'd all continually telling funny stories, off stage as well. But in situation comedies, he wasn't. I didn't think he was terribly funny. In my view, the greatest quizmaster in the world that I have ever heard. Nobody could touch him. But he wanted to be a comedian.
My brother Nicodemus is a wonderful athlete. He travels fast. He's a bit of a splinter.
No, Jackie. You mean sprinter.
I mean splinter. He slides down banisters.
Luckily for Jack, situation comedies were gradually being replaced by quiz shows. The public was beginning to prefer them, and the sponsors found them much cheaper to produce. The radio quiz shows of the late 40s and 50s were dominated by two stars, Bob Dyer and Jack Davey.
The makers of Personal welcome you to Australia's biggest and brightest quiz. And to give the money away, we give you Jack Davey.
Purcell show, give it a go. Our contestants are lined up for our quick snatch and grab game of 10 shillings a time, so let's get straight down to work. It's Mrs. Dalton and her husband, Mr. Dalton. The capital of Queensland is...
Brisbane.
You see, it's so easy. She grabs first and then makes up her mind. It's Mr. Crowley and Mr. Crowley, brothers, of course. An ex-Australian boxer was known as Vic...
Patrick.
There! Nice, Joe. That's what I call a left hook. That was very good, very good. It's Mr. Wood and his father-in-law, Mr. Sharrod. A nautical mile is known as a... Knot. Knot is right. It's Mrs. Walker and her sister-in-law, Mrs. Jurott. Film star David Daniel Kominsky is better known as Danny...
Hi.
Yes, that's that. And so to the next one.
The idea is I'll give you a well-known person's Christian name, and I want you to give me their surname. Their Christian names will be unusual. If I said Wolfgang, your answer would be Mozart. Got the idea? Horrible, isn't it?
Terrible.
Yes, and it doesn't get any better. Oh, you'll hate this one. Winston. Churchill, yes. Very good. Give the gentleman a cigar, right up close. Primo or Primo.
Sorry, I heard that.
You did? At least you're honest. I can't do anything about it. Would you have known it?
No.
Oh, you're very honest, aren't you? See what you've done, sir? You made an awful mess of this. I'll have to give you an extra one. I'll have to make up one. Irving.
I don't know it.
You don't know it? No. That was Berlin, Irving Berlin. Too bad. Gave you two chances. Adolf?
Mussolini.
In 1950, the Macquarie Network and the Colgate Palmolive unit had a kind of falling out. Jack stayed with Macquarie and began working at a grueling pace with half-hour shows every weeknight. Additionally, he would write and record the commentary for Movietone News each week. Merle Jamison recalls his great capacity for work.
Jack inclined to take about 5 good scriptwriters and sit down all day Friday and talk, just throw ideas around for a while. And then at 5 o'clock he'd send everybody else home, and then he'd sit down and rewrite the ideas himself by hand, in his own handwriting. And I would sit there and type the stencils. And when he'd finished, he'd go home, and I'd work until about 10 on the typewriter, come in the next morning and run them all off, get them over to 2GB for the censor. And, it was non-stop all the time. Marvellous man. He had this tremendous energy. The main problem was he expected everybody else to keep up with him, and I have on many occasions sat at the typewriter and worked all night, and I mean worked all night, and by the time he'd be writing and I'd be typing on the stencils, by the time it was finished about 8 in the morning, I would go home to my place to bed, and he'd go into the office with the stencils and not go to sleep.
It's amazing that he managed to keep it going.
He just burnt himself out, of course.
Jack didn't need very much sleep. He was one of those men who could, one of those persons who could go for 2 or 3 days without sleep, which he often did. But he was a perfectionist and a workaholic.
When he had a meeting, he'd say to his secretary, get some coffee and chicken sandwiches. Everyone would look at each other because they know then they were going to be there for a long time. It was going to be a long session. And what he would do is draw material out of all the people sitting in the room. They would sit in a circle and they would make suggestions. But he would only have people in the room who were experienced professionals that weren't making ridiculous suggestions. And he would write them down, then he would go back over it, then he would, all of the material, then he would have a ruler. And he used to say, on my scripts, I want to laugh an inch.
Keith Smith was a comedy writer with Jack in the 50s.
We'd work all night. I'd work all day at the ABC doing my own word from children programs and other things, and go down at 7 o'clock to the 2GB theatre, and by 8 o'clock we'd be on air, or recording, an episode of Ask Me Another, the animal, vegetable or mineral game. And after that, Jack and I would get into a cab and go out to his flat at Bellevue Hill, or stay in the office, and we'd open a lot of oysters and argue for about 2 hours on religion or some other argument, which has no ending. And then we'd start writing the script. We'd write it all night. I can still see his gas fire, as if I'd been there yesterday, and the huge stein on his ugly mantelpiece. And next morning, he'd go on air direct from his breakfast room in the morning program, and I'd do my grandpa voice there. No sleep all night, of course. While a hire car driver came and took the script for duplication, we'd go straight into 2GB auditorium, and by 1 o'clock we'd be on stage after rehearsal. Rehearsal was at 10 a.m. And by 2 o'clock the show would be in the can, and I'd get a cab home, no car then, and sleep on the way home, and Jack went off to do something else. Incredible.
How did he keep it up, I wonder?
I'll never know. One night he said, my back's killing me, my spondylitis. He had spondylitis. He said, it's killing me, I must walk around the block. And on this occasion, 3 of us were writing the show, he and Alexander MacDonald and myself. We knew where he was going, to Tomo's 2-Up school, or to play baccarat. And he came back and revealed that he'd dropped £800. That was 3/4 an hour later, when £800 was more than $1,600 then. Yeah. Maybe $5,000, $6,000, $7,000.
Wow.
Money came and flowed through his fingers like nothing.
Jack Davey was a reckless and compulsive gambler. Willie Fennell would occasionally join him for a game of cards.
I remember Jack playing at his flat, and the game could never be big enough for him. He always wanted to raise, let's make it £8 for cards. And I remember this game got to £64 for cards before you bought. Pounds then, not dollars, and by goodness, that was a lot of money. Jack finished up. He was about $1,500 or pounds down, and nobody else would lend him any money because they said, don't stay out of it, Jack, and they wouldn't sign a check. And Jack said, look, it's my flat. I said, I'm not going to bed. I'm going to not sit here either and just watch you blokes play. He said, I'm going to play. He said, it must be an angle. He said, I've got it. So he went and got his car keys. He had just bought a new Packard, which was then about £3,000 was a lot of money for a motor car. He threw the keys and his registration paper on the table. He said, "Oh, George, I owe you..." He said, "George, I owe you $1,500. He said, "There's the car keys and the registration. I'll cut the cards, one cut, double or nothing. You take the car or I continue playing." And George, I'm calling him George, I forget who it was at the time, but he said, "Oh, don't be ridiculous, Jack." He said, "You don't want to play for that much money." And Jack said, "Come on, I'll cut the cards." So the guy finally said, "Look, Jack, I won't cut them, but I'll play you one hand of poker for double or nothing." So Jack said, "That'll take too long. Cut the cards." So they cut the cards. Jack lost his car, threw across the keys and went to bed. That's how vicious he was with gambling.
Jack's gambling sometimes got him into deep trouble. Hal Lashwood again.
As a matter of fact, he got into very serious debt at one particular time.
As most people who bet heavily do.
Oh, absolutely. But it was very serious in his case. It reached the stage where he was so heavily in debt that the word was that the people who ran certain of these gambling places, that if he didn't pay up, damage would be done to him. And it was Macquarie, 2GB Macquarie, who came to his assistance, and or the management and Colgate Palmolive, and paid the debt for him. And then from that time on, for a long, long time, he was only given an allowance, a weekly allowance, because he had to pay back this debt, which was a huge, many thousands of pounds as they were in those days.
Jack was doing an Ampol show in Armidale, New South Wales in the mid-50s, and was a little surprised to have a contestant on the program that he'd met some time before.
Now you're going to sing You Are My Sunshine.
That's correct.
Thank you, Ken Aldridge. Thank you, Wilbur Kentwell.
You are my sunshine, my only sunshine.
Colossal. 5 pence.
Thank you.
Oh, goodness me.
I think I'm robbing you, Jack.
If you're my sunshine, thank heavens we've got clouds. That's all I can say. It's not that bad. I seem to know your face. Yeah, you're a resident here, are you?
I am, Jack, yes.
You belong to Armidale?
Yes, I've been up here about 2 years.
I see. What do you do for a living?
I'm a detective.
A detective?
That's right.
What sort of a detective?
Ordinary detective in the police department.
I meant £4 and 5 pence. There you are, then. All right, yeah, thank you. You here before, before I started the show, I was talking about playing cards last night?
Oh, Jack, yes.
I was only fooling. Oh, goodness, gin rummy. We just played gin rummy. Yes, played all night. I lost 1 and 3. Didn't actually lose it. I gave it to charity.
Oh, that's very good.
Yes,
yes. Yes, we bet once before, Jack.
Oh, I don't think so.
Yes. Yes, matter of fact, we went to the same school.
Oh, you're a New Zealander, are you?
No. I'm an Englishman, but on one occasion, we did go to the same school. You went in through the front door past the cockatoo, and I came through the wall the back way, remember? That's right.
You mean the time I was pinched for playing baccarat?
That's correct.
You! So you were one of the raiding detectives?
I went through the wall, yes, Jack.
You went through the wall?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
It's a tough wall, too, Jack.
My word, yes. Wait till you try and get down the back stairs out of here after. That was how long ago? Must be about
4 years, Jack.
4 years ago.
About 4 years, yes.
4 years, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cost about £10 a steak to quieten the dog down, too, you know.
Well, they had an Alsatian dog, didn't they, outside here?
That's right.
You came in just at supper time.
We had to wait for you to have your supper before we could...
Oh, that was very nice of you. Oh, yes, Tommy, yes. If I'd have known you got to wait till we finished, I'd have been there eating yet. But anyway, these things happen. As a matter of fact, it was one of those things I suppose can happen to anybody.
Oh, yes. Matter of fact, I couldn't get in the front way, otherwise I might have been there too.
Yes, that's quite possible. And if we hadn't been there, you fellas might have got in and joined in the game.
That's right.
Anyway, it's so nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you again,
Yes,
Jack.
I wish you all the luck in the world.
Thank you, Jack.
All I can say is if I'm up this way shooting again, duck, brother.
Macquarie certainly had a full-time job looking after their star performer and keeping him happy. Willie Fennell recalls an incident which is something of an insight into Jack Davey's attitude to money.
He said, I've got to go down to 2GB and see the big chief because I'm 30,000 in debt to them again. I said, Jack, it's not long ago that you were 30,000 in debt before. I believe they scrubbed it off. He said, yes, they did, but he said, I'm back in for another 30,000. And he said, they're worried that I'll get bumped off in a dark alley or something by the big boys. And he said, I've got to go down and see the boss. But then he said, I'm driving up to Surfers. He then had a flat above a service station, which was called after him, the Hi-Ho service station. He had his own flat up there. He said, come for a run up to Surfers. It's good weather. So I was young, free, bachelor. I said, all right, Jack. But he said, you better come down to GB and I'll get this big job squared up. So I went down to 2GB and I sat outside the boss's office while Jack went in. He finally came out whistling. He said, righto, we're off. So instead of driving on the Northern Road as I expected him, he started to drive up William Street near the cross. And I said, where are you going, Jack? He said, I just want to show you something. So he pulled up outside the big new car place, walked in, and to cut it very short, he bought himself a new car. Left the old one there, signed some papers, put down some kind of deposit, what he had, and signed all these papers. We went out and we got in this beautiful new car. I don't know what it was at the time, but it was a very expensive car at the time. And we started to drive up north. Well, it took me about 20 minutes to gather up enough courage to say, Jack, what happened about the 30,000? He said, I owe them 30,000. They're going to take it out of my wages. That's all they can do. But I said, you just bought yourself a new car. He said, yes, I know. What's wrong with that? I said, well, Jack, you're 30,000 in debt. Why go in and buy a new car? He said, Will, the way I look at it is, and this sums up Jack to me completely. He said, Will, the way I look at things, 30, 33, what's the bloody difference?
In his heyday, and that was the 50s, Jack was earning the incredible sum of £28,000 from his evening radio shows alone. They were, by that time, broadcast nationally, and a research company estimated that 2 in every 5 Australians heard a Davey show at least once a week. What was the secret of this success? Harry Griffiths.
Jack Davey was the most creative man I've ever met. He was a creative machine. He was the hardest working man I've ever met. He was certainly a hard man to work for. But what I learnt from Jack, the years I worked with him, have stood me in good stead all my life. Because Jack was never worried about how many hours work it took to do anything, so long as it was done and done properly. He had very high standards. He certainly knew his business. And he did wrote, directed, produced some of the best things that have ever been done in this country.
He wasn't what I'd call an intellectual or an academic. Nearly all the jokes that he told were terribly topical, and that's why they were terribly funny to people, because they hit the spot. But not terribly memorable. I mean, a lot of his old jokes we remember. Harry Griffiths and I often talk about some of the old jokes that he used to tell at the shows. But these little smart remarks were not memorable, but they were just hysterically funny at the time.
Yes, they came out of situations which were current and people that were in the news and events that were happening.
One of my best memories is one where I wasn't, and that was in Western Australia. It's hard to believe today, but in doing shows like that, and the shows I did with Pied Piper later, we'd have audiences up to 10,000 people in the open. And he had an audience like that in Perth on one occasion. I wasn't there. But to show the genius and the brilliance of the man in a very simple way, he had a nurse up on stage in Give It a Go or Purcell Packett's Time or something. And one thing you always try to dodge in quiz shows is nurses and service personnel, Navy men or Air Force men. They're notoriously dull in front of a microphone because of the discipline, which is part of their profession. And he said, and there was a railway line running behind the stage, a little way away. And he said, and what do you do for a living? Up close. He was up close, you know. I said, I'm a nurse. Just then a train going past went, whoo! He said, a train nurse. Which is very smart, I thought. Very smart indeed.
Great fun to go to a party with, or go to I had my 21st birthday at the Actors' Ball, sitting at the same table as him, and his remarks and wisecracks all night were absolutely hilarious, because in private he could be as blue as he wanted to be, and would be.
Jack had a number of risque song parodies that he used to sing at parties. He was even persuaded to record a few of them. Charles Graham, the ABC's general manager for Queensland, has the story.
When Jack Davey went to Perth, he used to use a piano player called Henry Cochrane, who was well known over there. And on one occasion, Henry organised a party for Jack, and he had a lot of distinguished people there, but at the 11th hour, Jack didn't turn up. The story was that he'd taken some lady over to Rottnest, and so poor old Henry was left without a guest of honour. So when Jack came back and was a bit contrite the next day, Henry said to him, I'm going to make you pay for this. I'm going to make you sit down in the studio and record all your famous warm-up pieces, which he'd never recorded before. And on this recording, it's Henry playing the piano with Jack doing one of his famous parodies.
She tried to tell me I'm too old for really making love. She told me I'm a dill, that I should use a pill, some hormone I don't know the meaning of. But each girl I will gladly warn, if I can just produce the prawn. In 9 months' time, she will recall that I was not too old at all.
I'm pretty sure that version of Too Young has never been broadcast before. Despite rather rigid censoring laws in the 50s, people were forever relating stories about what Jack Davey got away with on the air. Willie Fennell swears that this actually happened.
He asked a woman to name 4 song titles which had parts of the body in the title. He said 4 songs, and he said, it's a $64 question or a £64 question. It was the big one then anyway. Name 4. And he said, now, come on, you've got 10 seconds or whatever it was. And she said, your eyes have told me so, right 1, and over my shoulder. Anyway, she got 3 out, and she could not get the 4th one. Jack said, come on, here, you got 3 or 4 more seconds. There are dozens of them. Come, just one more. And she said, how about Phil the flute? He said, "You're all right. We'll give it to you. You win." He said, you were half right anyway. And Jack broke up completely. Of course, the audience broke up. And she didn't quite get the word out before Jack stopped her.
Another story, said to be still spoken about by cab drivers, was retold some years ago by Jack's biographer, Lou Wright.
A woman went for a big jackpot. The actual sum of money now eludes me, but it was a big jackpot.
Yeah.
And she got very close to the answer. It was something along the lines of, what great event happened in the gold fields at such and such a year? And the woman said, "Oh, that was the year gold was discovered." But it wasn't. It was the finding of the greatest gold nugget ever discovered in Australia. But because she was on the track of the gold thing, however it got into it, Jack was very reluctant to disqualify her. As a matter of fact, he was reluctant to disqualify anybody. That's nothing new.
Right.
But we pursued a little bit further, and in the judge's box we said, "No, draw it out a little bit more. That's not enough to win the jackpot. We will want a little bit more." And the woman couldn't do that. She couldn't add to what she had already said. So Jack said, "Well, I'll tell you what." He said, "I'll give you the jackpot if you can tell me what your husband said to you when he carried you across the threshold on your wedding night." She thought for a moment. She said, "Oh, Mr. Davey, that's hard." He said, "Give her the money."
Here's Keith Smith to relate a story about Jack Davey that's also been told many times.
One night, Jack was in his office at Main Guard Building in Phillip Street, sitting by himself in his darkened office, which was not unusual for him. And this has come down, it's almost a legend, this story, but I believe it to be true. And there was only one light on in the building surrounding. That was behind him. And he looked around and saw it. Now, he not only knew whose office it was, but he could also see right into the office. He also knew the man who occupied the office, and he knew his secretary. And they were engaged in a very intimate embrace across the office desk. Jack finally knew the man's office number, and he phoned him up across the chasm of buildings about a quarter of a mile away or less. The man stopped and picked up the phone, and all Jack said was, "God is watching you," and hung up.
Jack was no novice himself in the romance stakes. Hal Lashwood.
He was in a lot of scrapes, you know. I remember one particular incident where he, Jack was one of those persons, he liked the ladies, and on the town hall steps at one particular time, the husband of a particular lady he knew, they were both out here at the Tivoli Theatre, and the husband, there was a fight on the town hall steps. Not many people knew about that, so it's a little secret.
A lot of people made up stories about Jack.
Yes.
There was no doubt about it that he liked the ladies, and he liked sophisticated ladies, and they had to be good dressers and so on. But most of the time it was the women chasing him. And I was in a position to know because I used to open the fan mail.
Well, we've looked at Jack Davey, the radio star, the gambler, and the lover. Well, what was he like as a person? Keith Smith.
Well, I think that Jack was a selfish man in the academic sense of the word, not in the nasty sense. I've come close to people with genius before, or been in touch with people who were close to genius, but Jack truly was a genius. And because of this, he was on top of a pinnacle, virtually, of his own art, his own skill. And maybe one of the tragedies of Bob, we all have our personal tragedies, was that Jack found success come very easily. He didn't have to work at it. When we say he was a perfectionist, even perfectionism came easily to him because he was so good at what he did. His voice was magnificent, of course, the best voice radio's ever known in this country, I'd say. And one of the tragedies, of course, I suppose another tragedy, a personal one, was that we saw the best early in our careers, and it has never been equalled since, on television, certainly.
He was rather selfish, and I say that only in regard to his work. He wanted everything to centre around himself.
Yes.
Well, of course, being the boss of the unit, too, at that particular time, although he wasn't boss all of the time. There came a time when there was a split, and he left the unit, but he did return later on. But by that time, Ron Beck had taken over. Then he came back to work under Ron Beck. But when he was the boss, and controlled the shows, well, he was selfish. He wanted everything to be pointed at him.
I have forgiven him for any times that he's upset me, because what he taught me has stood me in good stead for the rest of my life. I understand certain things that I don't think I could have learned any other way than working with the cleverest man I ever met.
When television arrived in Australia in 1956, Jack was already a sick man. He'd had 2 heart attacks and had been in hospital for various complaints a total of 9 times in 7 years. People were shocked at his loss of weight and generally haggard appearance. But this was not the only reason that he was not a success on this very new medium.
Unfortunately, he presented his television programs exactly the same as he presented the radio show, because we always had an audience for the radio show. And then he also said, I'm going to do 3 programs a week, which he did. And I said, well, I think you're wrong there too. I said, I think that's overexposure. I said, I don't think anybody in the world that I know of can do 3 programs, particularly all of the same type. They varied, but they were quiz programs.
Yes.
And he became very ill, and I think it's general knowledge that he wasn't the great success, unfortunately, because he was such a great artist on television as he was in radio.
Jack's health continued to deteriorate. He had an operation for lung cancer early in 1959, but refused to give up cigarettes despite his doctor's advice. In April 1959, he did a My Choice program on ABC Radio. Here's part of that show.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jack Davey.
Hi-ho, everybody. Thank you, James Dibble. Well, a little work. I'd hardly call it work, but here I am in no commercial man's land. Not that I'm a stranger, because I've been in this place before. Not just this place, but with the ABC. Many years ago. In fact, I think in the old dance night from 2BL on a Saturday night, some of the favorites we had in those days probably will be in the program tonight. I was asked a peculiar thing, and that is to name, shall we say, the 8 tunes that I like best. Nobody could do that. I think I've got 888. I think some of the tunes that I would like to play or like to sing or like to have played would go on forever, because these days they're just that way. We better start somewhere, and when looking around me, I see some faces that I've known for years. In fact, in the very first broadcast I did in this country, the musicians, or many of the musicians, are here tonight. This is really nice and a little different. So I might be like a fish out of water, but I've got a tank full of friends.
In June 1959, Jack went to America for a trip sponsored by Ampol. On his return, he travelled to Albury for a big wool promotion. This was to be his last show. He entered St Vincent's private hospital in Sydney for the removal of his right lung, an operation that he was never to recover from. Keith Smith interviewed him at his Harbourside flat just 3 days before he died, on the 14th of October, 1959.
No, I feel fine, Keith. I feel probably a little tired, because I have to go into the hospital for this treatment every day. And that's a little solid. This ray thing does sort of leave you a little bit full of nausea when it's finished, But other than that, I feel fine.
Jack, some time ago, when you were in hospital in St Vincent's here in Sydney, you did issue, I think, a well-thought-out statement on how you felt. It touched on your philosophy. I think that the philosophy of anybody is a keynote to their makeup. Would you like to enlarge on that statement you made at that time?
I think you're talking about the statement when I said that if I had to live half a life, I wouldn't bother.
That's right, yes.
Well, let me put it this way. To say I wouldn't bother, that's a little bit schoolgirlish, I suppose. I'd bother twice as much if I had to live half a life and make it a full life. But if I found that I couldn't make it a full life and it was only half a life, I can't answer as to what I would do. I don't know. I've never lived that way. I would never want to. All I want to do is go right up to the time allotted to me at full steam. I can't work half speed. I don't think you can, Keith. I don't think anybody who likes their work and likes the people they work for, I don't think they can possibly work half speed.
At the same time, Jack, for a long period, I know you have set a pace which people around you have found pretty hard to follow. You have not only been active, I think people might say, not unkindly, that you have been fantastically active in your business life. Now, how about now? You're convalescing. How are you coping now with this necessary inactivity?
Well, of course, it's the biggest strain of the lot. I mean, I see people doing things, fellas out on boats just in front here in the waterfront, working away on boats and fiddling around, and I'd love to get down and take over. And when I see that they don't quite know what to do, I get madder still, but you can't. I can get about. I play cards, gin rummy, had a little game of poker the other night. I think everybody knows that's one of my weaknesses. But I only play a small game now,
just letting everybody know.
What kind of stakes? No answer.
Oh, very small. You know, we actually play for chips.
Yes, I know. The chips are worth a little too, aren't they?
Well, occasionally, you know, you can't just get them for nothing. But that's the whole thing, Keith. I would hate to have to put up with this for very long. My movements are not very positive, but on this coming Monday, I'll get some sort of an ultimatum from the doctors. This thing that I've got is an insidious sort of thing for anybody to have, and it's spread a little, and they're now trying to either stop the spread or halt it in its tracks, or, even with the greatest luck in the world, perhaps cure it. It's one of those things, so I'll find out what, and then I'll just have to work out my life to fit around that. I don't think I'll make many changes. I think I'll go just as hard as I did before, because I feel it's your personality, as we were chatting about before, more than anything else that governs what you do. I feel you can sort of be down and out almost and feel dreadful, and you can pick yourself up mentally and run a race.
After I'd done that interview, only ever saw Jack once again as 2 days later, when with his girl Fridays, he's walking around Double Bay, looking at the shops, giving a great appearance of normalcy, although he knew the score. And very close to his death, he displayed an amazing dignity, a laid-back attitude which had not been apparent before. He's the sort of man who'd buy 6 wristlet watches and wear 2 almost, you know, because, as I said, success had come to him very easily, and success is often harder to handle than failure. And but he found this strange dignity, which I don't doubt affects many, many people, if not all people, when they know they don't have long to live. And when Jack died, I was there in the office the morning afterwards, and Kevin Healy, then Jack's offsider, now an actor, he played Felicity's father in Carson's Law. Kevin Healy, everyone was crying, and Kevin said, "It's the end of an era." What a cliche, but as in so many dramatic situations, it applied as nothing else could. It was the end of an era.
Jack had one of the biggest funerals that Sydney had ever seen, with more than 15,000 people filing past the casket. Despite his incredible earnings, he left an estate of less than £3,000. But as Nancy Bridges said in her book Wonderful Wireless, you couldn't measure a man like Jack Davey in material possessions. His assets were a light, friendly voice, high intelligence, a devastating wit, and a seemingly insane lust for work. This programme on that giant of Australian show business of the pre-television era, Jack Davey, was written and produced by Rob Sharp. This is John West speaking, and our thanks go to those people who helped us remember Jack Davey: Percy Campbell, Abe Romaine, Merle Jamison, Willie Fennell, Hal Lashwood, Keith Smith, Charles Graham, Lou Wright, and Harry Griffiths.